Hello and welcome. I am Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. 26 November is special for India, the day celebrated as Constitution Day. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll tell you all that you need to know about the Constitution of India, so that by the end of this show, you are better informed than you were at the beginning. Be joined by guests who will share their valuable insights into the making of the Constitution as well. A quick word about how Constitution Day came into being. It was on this day, that is 26 November in 1949, that the Constituent Assembly formally adopted the Constitution. The Constitution came into effect on 26 January 1950. It established India as a sovereign and democratic republic. In 2015, the Government of India formally declared 26 November as Constitution Day. On 19 November that year, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment notified the decision to celebrate the 26th day of November every year as Constitution Day to promote constitutional values among citizens. The day aims to promote constitutional values and honor Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the principal architect of the Constitution. So since then, every year on this day, the nation celebrates the adoption of the Constitution. The Constitution of India was framed by a Constituent Assembly set up under the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. The Assembly held its first meeting on 9th December 1946. It elected Dr. Sachidanand Sinha, the oldest member of the Assembly, as the provisional president. On 11 December 1946, the Assembly elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as its permanent chairperson. The Constituent Assembly set up 13 committees for framing the Constitution, including a drafting committee led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. On the basis of the reports of these committees, a draft of the Constitution was prepared by a 7-member drafting committee. Let me highlight some unique features of the Indian Constitution. It is the longest written Constitution in the world, containing 395 articles, 22 parts and 12 schedules. The Constitution was not typeset or printed, but was handwritten and calligraphic in both English and Hindi. It was entirely handcrafted by the artists of Shantiniketan under the guidance of Nandalal Bose, with the calligraphy text done by Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada in Delhi. The original copies of the Constitution of India are kept in special helium-filled cases in the Library of the Parliament of India. Now, each part of the Constitution begins with a depiction of a phase or scene from India's national history. At the beginning of each part of the Constitution, Nandalal Bose has depicted a phase or scene from India's national experience and history. The artwork and illustrations, 22 in all, are rendered largely in the miniature style. They represent vignettes from the different periods of history of the Indian subcontinent. It ranges from Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley, the Vedic period, the Gupta and Maurya empires, and the Mughal era to the national freedom movement. By doing so, Nandalal Bose has taken us through a veritable pictorial journey across 4,000 years of rich history, tradition and culture of the Indian subcontinent. I want to make another point here. People of India are the ultimate custodians of the Constitution. It is in them that sovereignty vests, and it is in their name that the Constitution was adopted. The Constitution empowers citizen, but the citizen too empowers the Constitution. How? By following it, by adhering to it, by protecting it, and by persevering to make it more meaningful with words and deeds. The Constitution is nobody's preserve, and it is everybody's preserve. When it was adopted in the year 1949, there were no provisions regarding fundamental duties to the citizens, though there was a Part 3 for fundamental rights. The fundamental duties of citizens were added to the Constitution by the 42nd Amendment in 1976 upon the recommendations of the Swaran Singh Committee. The committee suggested that steps needed to be taken to ensure that the individual did not overlook his duties while in exercise of his fundamental rights. Now, by way of this amendment, Act of 76, a new chapter of 4A, which consists of only one article, that is 51A, was added, which dealt with a core of 10 fundamental duties for citizens. Fundamental duties are intended to serve as a constant reminder to every citizen that while the Constitution specifically conferred on them certain fundamental rights, it also requires citizens to observe certain basic norms of democratic conduct and democratic behavior, because rights and duties go hand in hand. The inclusion of fundamental duties brought the Constitution in line with Article 29(1) of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as well. The fundamental duties were essentially taken from the Indian tradition, mythology, religions and practices. Essentially, these were the duties that are the codification of tasks integral to the Indian way of life. Originally, 10 fundamental duties were listed. Later on, by virtue of the 86th Constitution Amendment in 2002, an 11th duty was added as well. All right, time to bring in our guests who are joining us on the broadcast. With us is Mr. D.K. Dubey, Professor Himanshu Roy and Mr. Atul Kaushik. Mr. Dubey is a Supreme Court advocate and expert on the Constitution. Professor Roy chairs the Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. And Mr. Kaushik is a former Additional Secretary of the Lok Sabha, the lower house of India's Parliament. Gentlemen, welcome to this special broadcast. Mr. Kaushik, if I could start with you, what's the Constitution and why is it called a living document? And do all countries treat it as a living document in their respective countries as well?
Thank you for having me. It's called a living document because it is not only reflecting the ethos that the Indian people wanted to enshrine in their governance back when it was made in the first time in 1949 and then came into being as a republic in 1950, but it has been factoring in the changes and the various new challenges and how to face them that have been faced by the country over the last 70 plus years. It is evidence of the fact that it is a living document that we have had as many as 106 amendments to our Constitution. Now compare this, for example, with the US Constitution, which is 1/10 in terms of amendments, just 21 amendments. And the US Constitution came 2 centuries before our Constitution came. So that is why it is called a living document.
Right. If I can come to you, Professor Roy, Mr. Kaushik was referring to the amendments to the Constitution over the last several decades. What can you tell us about those amendments to the Constitution? For instance, how many times has the Constitution been amended and what was the first amendment all about?
First amendment was regarding liberty, which has been debated a lot, the first constitutional amendment. And the last time has been 106th constitutional amendment. So in between, we have seen that in the last 75-80 years since 1950 onwards, 26 January, the Indian Constitution has acted as or has been a living constitution. There is no doubt about it. The number of amendments reflect it. But one important factor which I would like to share with the audience through this medium platform, and that some of my students in JNU and in Delhi University might be watching, that almost every chapter of the Constitution has a cultural motive, and right from Buddha to Ram, Bhagwan Ram, then crossing the Thar desert, then Akbar, then Tipu Sultan, and number of more than 50 cultural motifs are engraved onto the different pages of the handwritten Constitution. That's one interesting factor, because sometimes in the debate on secularism, this cultural aspect of Indic traditions, the historicity of the document that reflects is usually forgotten. And it's in this time, this is also important to reinforce these aspects of the historicity of this document. So, not only the living document,
Right.
through this document we also relive our history.
Mr. Dubey, since you practice law, I have to ask you this. We are told that the Supreme Court can at times deem provisions of the Constitution as unconstitutional. How do you explain that, be it Article 370 for instance, or even Article 19(1)(f)?
Actually, when we framed the Constitution, what was the basis of the framing of the Constitution? Actually, each and every country have their own culture, their own philosophy, their own history. And without following that history, without following that culture, without following the philosophy of the country, you cannot make any document. So the document whenever was the document when was in the living situation or the document was discussed in the parliament or in the Constituent Assembly, as Professor Roy said already. Constitution framed on the basis of the public policy of the country. That is why if any amendment in the Constitution or any provision of the Constitution goes against the public policy of the country, then the Supreme Court will say that because it is against the public policy of the country, that is why the constitutional provisions may also be declared as unconstitutional. Because we made a constitutional provision, and on the basis of these public policies, Supreme Court said that basic structure of the Constitution, they have given the philosophy of basic structure of the Constitution in Kesavananda Bharati judgment. So basic structure of the Constitution is followed from the public policy. That is why if the public policy will not be followed by any amendment or by any provision, then that provision may be declared unconstitutional at the time when the parliament go for the amendment or will go for the change.
Yeah, can I add here
Sure,
one point,
please.
interesting point that he has brought out regarding the basic structure. What subsequently was termed as basic structure in the judgment of the Supreme Court, it was never defined or it was never designated as the basic structure, but subsequently it was called as basic structure. Just a additional minor point here.
Indeed. And Professor, a unique feature of the Constitution is that it is entirely handwritten.
Yes, yes.
Could you tell us more about it?
See, Rajada Sahab was given at that point of time, if I remember correctly, approximately 6,000 rupees something to write, and Nandalal Bose from the Shanti Niketan was requested to engrave it, the cultural motifs on the different pages of the Constitution. So, together we find the original document is handwritten and different members of the Constituent Assembly at that point of time signed those original documents. But the interesting part is this, that on those documents, and if you look back into the debates of the Constituent Assembly, some of the interesting points that I would like to, because these are not discussed in the public discourse on the public forum, that directive principles and fundamental rights were integral part when the original it was proposed. Subsequently, because of the economic reasons, it was separated. It became a directive principles and the political rights became the fundamental rights, and the hierarchy changed. The chapter 3rd became the fundamental rights, chapter 4th became the directive principles, and similarly the other provisions of the Constitution. This was one interesting fact. The second interesting fact was a lot of discussions was taking place on the reservations of the and the abolition of the separate electorate. Then the structure of the governance, presidential form, the prime ministerial form, the parliamentary form, and what will be, because you remember there was a debate between Nehru and Patel on the prime ministerial form vis-a-vis the cabinet form of government, and the Constitution was yet in the progress. I am telling you about the 47 October, November, December, and at that point of time the Constituent Assembly was functioning. So, this kind of letters being written to Gandhi by Patel Sahab and then Nehru through Gandhi on the what will be prime ministerial form of government or the cabinet form of government, and simultaneously the debate is going on into the Constituent Assembly about the parliamentary form of government. So, these were some interesting facts that the students also and your audience through your platform must know about the Constitution, and subsequently we shape how the Supreme Court judgments came into this, defining, which we Dubeji referred as this Keswanand Bharti case. It never called in the judgment the basic structure. Subsequently it was in the academic discourse and in the public discourse, it came out as basic structure of the Constitution. One of course was the parliamentary form of government, the second was secularism, the third was federalism, etc., etc.
Mr. Kaushik, coming to you now, we are given to understand that the rights and duties of a citizen go hand in hand. There are chapters on rights and it also lists duties expected of a citizen. Now, what are those, if you can elaborate on this point, Mr. Kaushik?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You already mentioned that fundamental duties came as a later realization by our legislators to add to the Constitution. Originally, as Professor Roy mentioned, it was the fundamental rights and the directive principles, which both enjoined the state to do something for the citizens. Now, the fundamental rights included, very interestingly, the full right to freedom of speech and expression with certain reasonable restrictions. And those reasonable restrictions did not include public order. But from the time that we had the Government of India Act before the independence, and there were a lot of existing legislation that was adopted post-independence as well, which enabled state to take certain action that was perceived as a violation of these fundamental rights. So much so that some of these statements made in the press were taken to court. For example, in the Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras case, in Brij Bhushan versus State of Delhi case, and the government was totally flustered that having adopted the Constitution, they cannot but respect the provisions about the fundamental rights of the Constitution. But on the other hand, if public order is not maintainable by the state because of these fundamental rights, then they have a problem at hand. The second issue that came in terms of fundamental rights was that acquisition of property had a lot of restrictions in the original Constitution in Article 31. And one of the big landlords, Sir Kameshwar Singh, he filed a case against the state of Bihar on the right to property. And that also, according to the existing law, the landowner had to win against the state, and therefore state could not acquire property legitimately required for public needs. So it is for this reason that the first amendment to the Constitution came within almost an year of its adoption in 1951, where two things happened. One is that public order was added as one of the reasonable restrictions to the availability of fundamental rights to the citizens. And secondly, that Article 31A and B were added, and the 9th schedule was inscribed into the Constitution to enable certain laws to obviate judicial scrutiny. So if you put a law in the 9th schedule, then judicial review is not available against that law. Now this carried on for some time, but then public also has some duties towards the larger needs or the larger interests of the nation, and they sometimes have to take preference over individual people's rights. This led in some later cases for the Supreme Court to realize that there has to be a reasonable restriction on these fundamental rights. For example, in the Sajjan Singh case, Sajjan Singh was state of Punjab, there were two dissenting opinions in the Supreme Court about the right, the prevalence of freedom of the fundamental freedoms over public order. And then came Golaknath case, the famous Golaknath case of 1967, Golaknath versus State of Punjab, which reversed, the original position of Supreme Court that fundamental rights, it said, cannot be amended. And that led eventually to Keshwanand Bharti case, which has already been talked about, where the Supreme Court had to create a balance between rights and then the collective duty of the nation, which is that the basic structure or certain features of the Constitution are so inherent to our constitutional framework that legislature cannot overrun those basic features. And that is what was later on called, as Professor Rai said, the fundamental, as the basic structure. Now, this is the sequence of the, I would say, the contestation between the legislature and the executive on the one hand in terms of public purpose, and the judiciary on the other hand in terms of the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution, that gave rise to the idea of having in the 42nd Amendment a chapter on fundamental duties, and that is how chapter 4A came.
Indeed. Mr. Dubey, coming to you now, I have two clarifications to ask of you, doubts if you can call it that. One, it was decided way back in 1940 that India needs a constitution, but why did it take 6 years for us to get there, number one? Number two, the debate itself ended, I'm told, and correct me if I'm wrong, on 17th October 1949. So why was it adopted after a 1-month delay on 26th of November?
Actually, in 1940, we demanded, there was the demand of our country to give constitution for ourselves. But after in World War, they have decided that we will make the constitution ourselves. When they decided from the commission's report, commission came in India, from that time we established the committees first. So these committees basically started how to frame, how to work, and whatever was the procedure to frame the constitution. And then on 9th of December 1946, we established that. The second question is very important, because in the starting, when B.N. Rao was the constitutional advisor, we decided to frame the constitution, one constitution for the Union of India and the constitutions for the states. So, a lot of states, like 3 or 4 states, framed their Constituent Assembly also. Then Sardar Patel said, no, if the states will frame their own constitution, it will take a lot of time and there may be a lot of discrepancies. That is why M.K. Velodi Committee was established to frame the model constitution. When the model constitution was framed, they have supplied to the states, but there was the approximately 600 states with whom we will negotiate how we will frame the constitution. That is why, first of all, we unionized the states, and the number of unionization was 8. So first we framed the constitution in the Constituent Assembly. Then first we sent these constitution to these unions. Then the unions adopted the constitution first, like by the declaration, like the Jammu and Kashmir declared, and other states, Bhopal and other unions declared. When all these states unions make the declaration that we are adopting this constitution, then constitution came back to the parliament again, Constituent Assembly, and Constituent Assembly on the 26th of November 1949 adopted it on the last stage. That is why there was the time from October to November, because the constitution has sent it to the states. Right. States adopted this, they declared that we are adopting it. Then sent back to the Parliament, sent back to the Constituent Assembly, and Constituent Assembly adopted it. That is why there was that time gap.
Fascinating indeed. I'm approaching the end of my time. So, Professor Roy, you get the last word. How do you see Dr. Ambedkar's role in the making of the Constitution? Alongside him, there were other stalwarts, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel. So, in totality, how would you see their contributions to the making of the Constitution, Professor?
Amazing, amazing. Of course, not only as the chairperson, because that was the designation. Let me slightly give a one-liner brief history.
Sure.
It was Sardar Patel who persuaded Gandhi to bring Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly, because he has lost the elections when he had fought the elections earlier. The constituency, because it had become Bangladesh now Bangladesh, East Pakistan, and therefore he had to contest the election once again. So it was Sardar Patel who persuaded the Gandhi. I read the 3 letters, the correspondence that transpired between Gandhi and Patel, and then the chairman of the drafting committee. So as a chairman of the drafting committee, of course, lot of debates are there about his making of the Constitution, that the role of the Rao and the other effectively 3 members who played a crucial role. There were 7 members in the committee, which was drafting, which was going through all the amendments that were being suggested by the Constituent Assembly. So effectively 2 to 3 because of the health reasons and other reasons. But then as a leader of the drafting committee, you have your own responsibility and your own role to play. And Ambedkar being the best mind of the time, because he had his double PhD, the number of papers, the number of books that he wrote at the time, starting from the provisions of the provincial finance, etc., the economists, the sociologists, the political science, all combined into one, plus the law. So he was the best mind to take into account the drafting of the Constitution. So undoubtedly, he played a very decisive role in the making of the Constitution, and with the help of Sardar Patel in finishing the Constitution in less than 3 years.
Indeed. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'll have to leave it at that. May I thank all our guests, Mr. D.K. Dubey, Professor Himanshu Rao, and Mr. Atul Kaushik, for joining us and sharing your perspectives with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And with that, it's a wrap on this special broadcast. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye.